Michael Harrison had been a widower for 3 years when his daughter Emma decided he needed to start living again. At 42, with silver beginning to thread through his dark hair, he'd grown comfortable in his routine of work, soccer games, and quiet evenings helping his 12-year-old with homework. But Emma had other plans. "Dad, you need to meet someone," she'd said one evening, her young face so serious it made his heart ache. "Mom would want you to be happy." So when Emma's art teacher mentioned her friend Sarah might be interested in meeting him, Michael reluctantly agreed. They arranged to meet at the Riverbend Cafe tilde copyright on a Saturday morning. Emma had been oddly insistent about the place, claiming it had the best coffee in town. Michael arrived 15 minutes early, wearing his pressed white shirt and dark slacks, feeling more nervous than he'd felt in years. He stood near the entrance, watching the morning light pour through the tall windows, when he noticed her. She sat at a table near the window, blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, wearing a soft champagne-colored dress that caught the morning light. Sarah was younger than he'd expected, perhaps in her early 30s, with delicate features and an almost ethereal quality about her. She was beautiful in a way that made him feel suddenly self-conscious. But as he watched, trying to gather his courage, he noticed something else. Her wheelchair was positioned carefully at the table, and she seemed to be watching people's lips intently as a barista spoke to her. Michael's stomach tightened. Emma hadn't mentioned this. Neither had the art teacher. He stood frozen, shame washing over him as his mind raced with doubts. This wasn't what he'd expected. This would be complicated. What would Emma think? What would his life look like? He could leave. She hadn't seen him yet. He could send a text, make an excuse, and slip out the door. His hand actually moved toward his phone. But then Sarah turned her head, and their eyes met. She smiled, a gentle, knowing smile, and raised her hand in a small wave. There was something in her expression, a quiet dignity mixed with what looked like understanding, that rooted him to the spot. Michael forced his feet to move forward. Each step felt heavy with guilt. "Michael?" she asked, her voice carrying the particular cadence of someone who had learned to speak without hearing their own words. It was clear, but different. "Yes," he managed, sliding into the chair across from her. "Sarah." She watched his lips carefully. "I'm glad you came," she said, her hands moving gracefully even as she spoke, "though I wondered if you might leave when you realized." The directness of it caught him off guard. I'm sorry, It's okay," she interrupted gently, her eyes warm despite the awkwardness. "I saw your face. I've seen that look before." She paused, took a sip of her coffee, giving him time. "Your daughter told me not to mention it in the messages. She thought you might not come if you knew." Michael felt his face flush with embarrassment and something deeper, something that felt like shame for his own weakness. "Emma did this?" Sarah nodded. "She's quite determined. She came to the community center where I volunteer, teaching art to children. We talked for a long time." She said her father had forgotten how to let people in. Hearing his own struggles described by his 12-year-old daughter, through the stranger who was somehow not a stranger at all, cracked something open in Michael's chest. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "I almost left." "I'm not proud of that." "But you stayed," Sarah said simply. "That's what matters." They sat in silence for a moment, and Michael realized the Cafe tilde copyright had a gentle hum to it, a weekend morning piece that felt safe somehow. Sarah's eyes were patient, giving him space. "Tell me about Emma," she said finally. "Your daughter sounds remarkable." So he did. Michael found himself talking about Emma's soccer team, her stubborn insistence on trying new things despite his own hesitation, her paintings that filled the refrigerator, the way she still asked him to check for monsters under the bed even though she was getting too old for that. Sarah's face lit up as she listened, her hands occasionally moving in sign language as if translating his words to herself. "She sounds like her mother," she said softly. "She does," Michael agreed, surprised at how easily he could say it. "Jennifer was like that, fearless. She always saw the best in people." "Emma told me about her," Sarah said. "About the accident." "I'm so sorry." Michael nodded, feeling the familiar tightness in his throat. But somehow, sitting across from this woman who watched him with such gentle attention, it felt easier to bear. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "Why did you agree to this?" "To meet me." Knowing Emma had set it up this way, Sarah smiled, a little sadly, because I've been on the other side too. After my accident 4 years ago, my friends tried to set me up a few times. Most men found excuses to leave before coffee arrived. One was honest enough to say he couldn't handle it. I appreciated his honesty, even though it hurt. She traced the rim of her cup with one finger, choosing her words carefully. Emma reminded me of myself at that age, after my mother died, determined to fix what felt broken in my world. I couldn't say no to her. Michael felt something shift in his chest. "I'm sorry," he said, "for almost being one of those men." "You're here now," Sarah repeated, "and you're honest. That means something." They talked for another hour. Sarah told him about her work as a graphic designer, how she'd adapted her workspace after the accident, about the joy she found in teaching children to express themselves through art. Michael shared stories about his work in accounting, how numbers had always made sense to him in ways people sometimes didn't, until Jennifer had taught him to see differently. As they spoke, Michael found himself watching the way Sarah's face expressed what her voice sometimes couldn't, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, the graceful movement of her hands, the careful attention she paid to his words, as if each one mattered. When he checked his watch, surprised at how much time had passed, Sarah's expression grew more serious. "Michael," she said, her voice careful and clear, "I want to tell you something Emma made me promise to say if you stayed." He leaned forward, suddenly attentive. Sarah's eyes held his. "She told me about the night her mother died, how you held her and promised that your family would be okay, how you've kept that promise every day for 3 years." Her voice wavered slightly. "She said she knows you're scared to let anyone new in, that you think you're protecting her by keeping your heart closed, but she wants you to know that she's not afraid of you loving again." Tears stung Michael's eyes. Unexpected and hot. "She said all that?" Sarah reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of his. "She said to tell you that opening your heart doesn't mean forgetting. It means honoring the love you had by letting yourself live again." Michael let out a shaky breath, and then, making a choice that felt both terrifying and right, he closed the distance and took Sarah's hand. Her fingers were warm, real, alive. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I'm going to make mistakes. I have a lot to learn." "We both do," Sarah said gently. "But maybe that's okay." They sat there in the morning light, two people who'd been broken by life, held together for a moment by the wisdom of a 12-year-old girl who understood that kindness and courage sometimes looked like showing up despite your fear. As Michael walked Sarah to her accessible van afterward, helping but not hovering, learning to let her show him what she needed, he thought about Jennifer, about how she'd always pushed him to be braver than he thought he could be, and he realized that Emma carried that same spirit, that same generous heart. "Same time next week?" Sarah asked, looking up at him from her driver's seat. Michael smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. "I'd like that." "And Sarah, thank you for giving me a chance to be better than I was this morning." She reached out and squeezed his hand once more. "We're all just trying to be better than we were yesterday," she said. "That's all any of us can do." As he drove home, Michael thought about calling Emma, but decided instead to wait, to tell her in person about the morning, about how sometimes the greatest gift we can give each other is the chance to surprise ourselves with our own capacity for growth. Because Sarah was right, he'd stayed, and in staying, he discovered that opening your heart again doesn't diminish the love you've carried, it honors it. It says that love taught you how to be brave enough to try again, and maybe that was the lesson all along. Not that we should protect ourselves from hurt by closing off, but that we should honor those we've loved by staying open to connection, to growth, to the unexpected kindness that appears when we're brave enough to show up, even when we're afraid. That evening, when Emma came home from her friend's house, Michael pulled her into a long hug. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair, "for being wiser than your old dad." Emma hugged him back fiercely. "So you went? You met her?" "I did," Michael said, pulling back to look at his daughter's hopeful face. "And Emma, you were right about everything." Her smile was pure sunshine. "I know, Dad. I learned from the best." And in that moment, Michael understood that grief and joy weren't opposites, they were companions. And learning to hold both with an open heart was perhaps the bravest thing any of us could do.